Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, personal well-being, COVID, resilience, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there, so I'm really easy to find. And we'll see about getting you on the show or finding someone to come on and talk about the topic you want to hear about. I do respond to everything I get. A couple of quick announcements. I will be speaking at 3 conferences later this year in 2021, depending on when you watch this. In October 4th, 6th, at the Continuity Insights Conference in Minneapolis. November 3rd to 4th, I will be presenting at BCI World Virtual. And December 1st and 2nd, I will be speaking at the Continuity and Resilience Today conference. And that's in Toronto, just down the road from me. So hopefully that will certainly be a in-person event. I've mentioned before, if you wanted to speak about a topic, reach out. Well, today's guest did exactly that. However, he's been on the show once before. I'd like to welcome to today's show the author of America ReUnited, Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli. Dr. Ciaramicoli.
Good morning, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Good. Very good. Thanks.
And as I said, you've were on the show once before, not the video part for YouTube, but on Voice America, where we talked about one of your previous books, The Soulful Leader. And that was way back where I wrote it down. Oh, yeah. 2019, September 5th.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Well, welcome back. I'm glad you reached out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, just in case anybody hasn't listened to that Voice America episode, can you give us a minute or two to talk about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
I'm a clinical psychologist, Alex. I've been in practice for almost 40 years now. I was a chief psychologist at a local hospital for many years. In the last 6 or 7 years, I've been in private practice exclusively and writing. I've written 3 books in the last 2 years. The Soulful Leader was one, The Triumph of Diversity, and now this book, America ReUnited. And I've written these 3 books because I'm so concerned about what's happening in America in particular, because our rates of prejudice have increased significantly. Our suicide rates have increased significantly. Poverty has increased. So we're in trouble. We have a lot of difficulties. Our anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, sexism, and discrimination against those of other sexual orientations are all increased substantially in recent years. And that's why I wrote this book.
And I mentioned in my opening that on this show, we talk about anything to prepare individuals, communities, and organizations. And a lot of things you touched on right now are impacting those areas.
Yes.
An organization or community or just people in general. So that's why sometimes somebody might look at this and think, oh, it's a political book, but it's not actually political. There's a lot of incredible examples in here. And some of them are, I would say, heartbreaking and very personal to you. And I know you mentioned, because of some of the things that are occurring is what drove you to write the book. But was there any specific event or anything that you thought, what people need to understand this and how this came about? What prompted you to decide to write about some of these topics?
Among my clients, Alex, I had so many people coming to me and feeling scared and uncomfortable in our country. Like never before. And people were very upset about the hateful speech and behavior of so many, because we have been bombarded with hateful speech in America in the last few years. And I just heard more and more people being disturbed by it, asking me, what's causing it? Why are people so mean? Why are people... I mentioned in the beginning of the book that a 92-year-old woman and my 7-year-old granddaughter, Carmela, asked me the same question one day. And that really prompted me to write this book. She just said, why are people so mean? She had seen a few clips on TV, the way people were talking. And it's very dangerous for our young people to be watching adults, people in power, people in political or educational or corporate positions, speaking this way about each other. And I think our empathy for each other in America particularly has declined substantially. So this motivated me in particular.
I know you mentioned social media in here a few times. Do you think social media, and it doesn't take long for me to go off script here. Do you think social media is contributing to that? Because now it's given voice to disenfranchised people. It's giving a voice to people who used to love gossiping and got a kick out of that. But now when one person uses social media, it's not just going to their little group of friends, maybe sitting at a table having lunch or at the end of the bar. It's now going to everyone around the world.
Yes.
Do you think social media is, I don't want to say the cause, but contributing to these feelings, the ones that you wrote about?
I think social media, Alex, is seductive. In other words, people start listening to a particular podcast or a particular TV show, a news show, and then they get comfortable with whoever the host is. And then when people are promoting false ideas, they first don't do it immediately, but they do it over time as they gain the viewer's trust. And as I cited in the book, a number of studies have shown that people who watch the same podcasts or the same authors or the same media interviewers or the same TV program, whether it's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, or whatever it is, One America, they start to believe whatever they're hearing, and they stop examining what they're hearing. So if I tell you that such and such is happening in Minnesota today, rather than you researching, that's what I try to teach in the book, or looking into, is this fact or fiction? And that's one of the great difficulties of social media. People are just accepting. You get a tweet. One of my patients came in and she had a tweet and she was talking about something in the South. And I said, well, how do you know that's true? Well, I saw it on Twitter this morning. Well, because you saw something on Twitter this morning doesn't mean it's true. And that's the danger. When you're following the same people, when you've been invested in those people, and now whatever they say is true.
It's interesting you brought up that point too, because doing research. I recently saw an article that popped up on Facebook, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Looked into it and found that it was actually a republished article from 20 years ago about two people having a feud. And yet the last 5 years I'd heard, they reconciled, they were getting along fantastic, they were working together, and I went, oh, geez, what happened so quick? And then I did my research and found out this is just a reprint from 20 years ago when they weren't getting along. This is crazy. Why are people doing that? I hope, and I couldn't help, I knew I was going to be talking to you, and I couldn't help but think that, oh my God, there's probably a whole bunch of people who believe this is current, and it's not.
It's pretty amazing in that regard, because it reinforces the point that people are just taking it as true. I mean, I in some of my research and sort of Twitter claims by different people, there was a hashtag Black Lives Matter for a number of tweets. Then I did research to find out where was this tweet, or where did it originate? It originated in South America with a white supremacist group, and then it was retweeted as Black Lives Matter. You see the manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Now the average person reading that thinks that that's where it came from, but it didn't come from Black Lives Matter. It did not come from that movement. It came from a white supremacist movement.
Wow.
That was just re-tagged.
Yeah. Wow.
To influence people and manipulate people.
Yeah. And if people start paying attention to that stuff, it hurts their organizations. It's going to hurt their communities. And most definitely at some point, it's going to hurt them. And I don't necessarily mean physical harm, but as you bring up, mental harm, and organizations and how they operate and how they're trying to help people, because nobody knows what to believe anymore.
It brings organizations into a black and white thinking pattern, where you're either on one side or the other side, rather than what I espouse in the book is using empathy. Empathy is the capacity to understand and respond to the unique experiences of another. So I'm encouraging people to look beyond the surface. Look beyond the surface of what you see, what you read, what you hear in nighttime TV, because nighttime TV is basically entertainment.
Yeah.
Fox News was sued, and when they went to court regarding some false ideas that they were propagating, they were found innocent because they said, well, it's not a news show, it's an entertainment show. Well, I don't think people watching it know it's an entertainment show. I think they think it's news. And I'm not just saying Fox News. A number of these outlets are biased on one side or the other.
Mhm.
But we have to slow down and have some tolerance for looking beyond the surface to find out what the truth is. That's how we unite people and bring them together. Because much of what we're hearing is trying to gain attention and gain an audience. And once it works, and you get more and more of it.
Yeah. Well, then there's money to be made when you have all those listeners, and
Very
advertisers. So if you can get away with spreading misinformation, or in my example, retweeting things from 20 years ago and making it seem brand new, well, I'm going to make money. I don't care if people like it or not. I'm going to get money out of it.
You know the story about Barack Obama and Bill Gates and they eat children? I mean, that they were cannibalistic.
Yeah.
And I mean, people actually read that and believed it. And then it was recirculated and recirculated. I'm sure it's still out there now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people tell me, "Can you believe that?" And I say, "No, I don't believe it."
Yeah. Yeah.
But some people did believe it because they're listening to the host that they trust.
Yes. Yeah. Well, let's jump in, because now we're touching on some of the things that you talk about in your book. And your Barack Obama example there is, related to, the hate that was around. So where does hate speech come from? Where does it originate? How does it originate?
It originates, Alex, with unresolved conflicts from childhood and a feeling of helplessness growing up in your own home. If you grow up with sadistic parents or angry parents, then there's two ways that people tend to develop young people. Either they internalize it and feel very negative about themselves, or they externalize. And the hateful speech and actions are modeling what you've been exposed to. So rather than dealing with one's insecurities internally, you're projecting it out. You're finding an enemy. And in today's culture, we're encouraged to find an enemy. Think of the way politicians talk to each other, or the way different corporations talk about their competition. It's in very critical language rather than understanding language. So we see that this is propagated over and over again.
Yeah, I noticed that that friendliness and sometimes even laughter between opposing parts isn't there. It's just hate, or throwing insults, and sometimes I think it's maybe just to try and get the best soundbite to once again make Twitter, or Facebook, or other news outlets headlines, and that's the only reason they're doing it.
I use the example of the man grabbing a pole. I don't know where it came from, but in January 6th, and he was stabbing a police officer, and he said, "Get his gun, get his gun." Now, when that was aired that night, people were talking about different theories that people had and different political persuasions. My point is, it had nothing to do with politics. I know lots of Republicans and people on one side, or far right or far left, but they would never pick up a pole and stab an innocent person and say, "Get his gun." That came from those unresolved hurts in that person's life, and he's taking it out on somebody else. That's what I'm trying to teach you in the book, that hateful speech and behavior has nothing to do with what's going on in the world. It has something to do with unresolved hurts, and then finding an outlet, and then some powerful people giving permission for that outlet. It's okay to be that way. It's okay to talk that way.
Like stoking the fires.
Yes.
So how do we go about lessening that?
I think empathy is the key to lesson, which empathy slows down the process and really helps people try to understand each other. This concept of deliberate polling, where you bring people together who have opposite opinions of a lot of things. For instance, they've done it with climate change, bringing people together and then bringing experts in on climate change and bringing in data and bringing in articles and papers to read over a 2-day period. 70% of those people changed their mind by the time they left those, because those experts force people to slow down and really look at the facts. So rather than listening to some TV promotion about it one way or the other, they actually learned what's going on in our universe. And then they made decisions. And they realized that people on the other side were not their enemies. They weren't their enemies. And a lot of what they thought and what they heard about people that are anti-climate change or for climate change, they had more in common than they realized. Both groups were frightened by what was happening, but they didn't understand really the objective truth about it.
Well,
So I think slowing down and allowing empathy to see through all the manipulative stuff, all the newscasts and the Twitter feed, but finding out what the facts are, that's what empathy does.
it's like two groups coming at the same issue with the same concerns, but from different directions. And because
Yes.
you're coming from a different direction, do people start thinking, oh, this, as among many other issues, always has to be an us versus them type thing, instead of all of us have the same concerns, but because you're coming at it from a different direction, well,
Sure.
you're wrong.
You take the issue of vaccines and people, hating each other because they're on one side or the other, rather than what are the facts.
Mhm.
And I hear in my clients, when they come in and tell me what they believe about the vaccine, that there's so many inaccuracies. And when you start to ask people where it's coming from, you get back to social media. It causes infertility. It doesn't. It does this. It does that. There's a number of, there are people on TV last night saying that it caused so many deaths. And in this morning's news in America, it was indicated that what people heard last night was not true at all. It was but it was an attention grabber. See,
Yeah.
that host his video was on all the stations this morning.
Yeah. So
He's
he's
gathering an audience.
exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what the message is, whether he's
No, it
right
doesn't
or
matter.
wrong.
If you say something outlandish, it's going to get airtime.
Yeah. And that's why I said earlier, I think a lot of people do things just for sound bites so they can get in the headlines.
Well, wouldn't it be great if we all realized that?
Yeah.
Throughout the
Yeah.
that
Unfortunately,
these
there's a lot.
sound bites are not necessarily objective truth.
Exactly.
They are, in many cases, efforts to manipulate you. And as you said earlier, to buy certain products because there's advertisers involved. And these shows have millions of people watching every night, 6 to 10 million people watching.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of things, I know in general, you said, do some research, but what can people start doing right now to lessen hate speech? Let's say, there are some people working, they hear something, they believe it, but because they're working, 9, 10 hours a day, they don't do anything about it. The hate speech just goes on and on and on. Are there any things they can do right away to help lessen some of this misinformation and hate speech and things that are impacting them, their organizations and communities? Anything can do right away, even if it's turn off Twitter.
Yes. Well, you and I talked, a few years ago regarding the book, The Soulful Leader, about not returning aggression with aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get in the mud with something. When someone is being hateful or they're just projecting all kind of extremes onto you, don't engage with that person. Invest. Try to calm the person down, because you're going to talk to them. But if you can't calm them down, de-invest. I'm not going to engage with you if you're yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
I have a motto that I don't talk to anybody who's yelling at me, because there's no reason goes out the window. The louder people's voices get, the more where understanding is lacking, because you can't think straight when you produce the stress hormone cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
You're so wound up. And cortisol, when you get to that point, which is why many hosts try to get people to be angry, and at certain events try to get people to be angry, because your empathic range goes from out here to in here. Cortisol, the stress hormone, produces repetitive, obsessive thinking. And that's what people who are trying to manipulate you want you to be doing. Because that's where black and white thinking comes in.
And I guess hosts and moderators and politicians, corporate leaders, all do that to get a response out of everybody so that people end up listening, right? Because if your empathic, thinking does come to such a short view, well, then you're more in line, I guess, to believe whatever you're going to be told.
Yes. the more excited you get, the more adrenaline and cortisol that's flowing, the less objective you're going to be. In the book, I talk about truths and feeling truths versus knowledge. What's the difference? Well, feeling truths are what confirmation bias. We're looking, we have a longing for a certain outcome, so we perceive it when it's not even there. We just hear a little bit and we fill in the spaces. Objective truth is really just looking at the facts and putting our biases aside and acknowledging that we all have our biases. But we need to know what they are so that we can put them on the shelf and see clearly.
Well, now biases have cropped up a lot over the last few months, especially we talk about resilience, individual resilience and operational resilience and organizational resilience. How does a person know they even have a bias though? Because sometimes their reactions, they do come out and you don't even know why it's coming out.
We learn about our biases through our interactions with other people. If you have friends that are more likely to tell you what you need to hear than when you want to hear, you're going to get some objective. The groups that I do, communication and leaders groups, I've had them for over 30 years. People give each other empathic feedback on a weekly basis. So eventually you come to see if 10 people think that you're biased toward African Americans or toward Jewish people, it's hard to deny it because we've heard the way you think and the way you talk. And maybe it's a more subtle bias. Maybe it's a gender bias. But we all grow up with biases. We don't grow up in perfectly objective families. So it's admitting that they're there. But also we need feedback from other people because we're all too subjective.
You give an example about that. I think the person you named in here was Anna, if I'm recalling the name correctly, in a session where she was projecting outwards to other people in one of your focus groups or meeting groups, I should say. And someone finally stood up and confronted her and said, you're being not being such a good person in these meetings. You're criticizing everybody. And it took that opportunity to receive that feedback, which she hadn't received before, to finally turn things around and start seeing things with a more clear mind.
Yes.
So is that one of the tips maybe everyone should do is really listen to other people, when you get feedback. Feedback isn't always a negative. Right?
Mm-hmm. No, feedback is how we learn who we are. We can't determine it on our own. We have to be in relationship to other people to know. And in the corporate world, in the educational world, wherever we work, wherever we land on a daily existence, we have to take in the feedback we get from other people. In that example, I gave that example in the book because she was one of the most hateful persons that I had ever met. But in this leadership and communication group, over time, she became attached to people. And then one of the men that she had high respect for said, you're a smart woman and you have a lot of insight at times, but you really are a sniper. Yeah. Said you look for the flaw in people and then you pounce on them. And he said it's not fair and it's not attractive. And it devastated her because she liked him, she valued him. And that feedback finally got through. And rather than her come out with a lot of anger, which we expected, she didn't. She teared and she internalized it for the first time. What we were talking about earlier, Alex, is a lot of people with hate externalize. They're projected out. What has to happen is it has to go inward. Like, okay, so if you're a sniper and you're just looking for people's flaws to pounce on them, how come? What is it in you that's disturbed that you're not addressing? And then we started to address those in her life.
Yes, and I know I won't say a perfect ending, but it became a much happier ending for her, in the long run.
Yeah, she stopped being a blamer.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing in society today is a lot of blaming.
Mm-hmm.
We see it in certain European countries as well. A lot of blaming, a lot of anger, a lot of it's somebody else's fault. When it's someone else's fault, my life is stuck. Because if I'm critical of you and you have to change for me to feel better, no control over what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So you have to change the world and make the world perfect for me to feel okay. But if I take responsibility for myself and I say, I'm going to change me, I'm going to work on me, that's where I have control. I have no control over other people.
That's right.
So you can go around hating lots of people. What does it do? Nothing. It just produces more hate.
Yep. It's a very Buddhist way of thinking.
Yes.
You know, and
yes.
I know you mentioned that in here as well. Not specifically this is a Buddhist way, but
Yes.
For myself, I see it as a very Buddhist way of thinking. You know, take care of the self, fix the self first, and then it's easier to go out and help others.
Yes, and I've read so many Buddhist texts, and it's helped me in terms of increased insight, because I think, you know, Buddhism is a way of life, and it's a way of perceiving. You know, nutritionists say we are what we eat. As a clinical psychologist, I say we are what we perceive.
Mm-hmm.
So if you frown, and I think that means you're angry with me, and I start insulting you, then later on I find out that you had a migraine, you weren't upset with me at all. You know, it's those jumping to those conclusions, those immediate reactions. And immediate reactions usually comes from people's history. It's
Mm-hmm.
not based on what you're seeing. Rather than me, what's the option? I could have said, no, Alex, you're frowning. Are you okay? Now, maybe you would have said, I'm frowning because I'm frustrated with you. Or maybe you would have said, you know what, I got a wicked headache.
Yeah.
And then we would be clear. But I would have to ask rather than assume. Empathy doesn't assume, it doesn't generalize. It doesn't make assumptions based on what we see on the surface. It goes beyond the surface, and asking open-ended questions is the way in.
Yeah.
Gee, you're frowning. What's going on?
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
And on that
hateful people presume that they know. They
Yeah.
know who you are, and they know what you stand for.
Yeah, and almost always it's the opposite, completely wrong. You know. On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking with Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, author of America Reunited, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli and his new book, America Reunited. Dr. Ciaramicoli, can you tell us, one of the things you actually talk about in here, can you tell us about long-term poverty and how that's impacting people? Because when I think of poverty, I'm thinking how that's impacting people. That can impact communities most definitely. You know, but
yes,
can you tell us about the effects of that?
Well, you know, I think often throughout the world, people don't realize that in America, we have 40 million people living under the poverty line. 17 million children living in poverty. So we have a poverty issue, particularly in the Midwest and the South, the high rates of unemployment. And what does it do? What does poverty do? I mean, it affects memory, it affects personality, it affects patience, and parents, you know, working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet and don't have the time to spend with children. It's been found in certain studies that even children who grew up in poverty, the hippocampus, the part of the brain that is devoted to memory, is smaller. It loses volume as they age into adolescence. So it has many consequences. It contributes to alcoholism, opiate addiction, different kinds of drug addiction, and it really influences learning as well. There are higher rates of ADHD among children who grow up in poverty. I mean, we have the widest rich-poor gap of any high-income nation in the world. So we have very wealthy people. We also have very poor people. And I think, you know, I have a number of clients from other countries. They often assume that, you know, everybody here is doing well. It's not really true. It's not really true. It's not only poverty. When we think of the mental health of people in our country, I mean, why is it that we have the highest rates of suicide that we've had in the last 30 years? You know, women from 45 to 65, there's a 63% increase in suicide, a 400% increase in girls from 10 to 14. So we're in trouble. You know, poverty has an impact on everything. Physical health, mental health, learning, and the learning piece is very critical, because if children can't learn and their brains are being influenced negatively, then they go out into the world and they can't obtain employment either. because they're at a deficit. So it really has wide-ranging effects.
It kind of compounds on what you said in the first segment. I think, about people getting the wrong information, which means they won't understand to do their research when some of these people that aren't in the best of economic shape, they, as you said, the brain capacity and the learning capacity goes down. Then it's easier for them to believe some of the misinformation that's being put out there, right? It kind of compounds.
That's an excellent point, because we know that as people are poor, if they're uneducated, they don't have a high school degree, the rates of alcoholism, suicide, opiate addiction are much higher, but they're the most vulnerable group of all.
Mm-hmm.
These are the people that get manipulated. Why? Because they're hurting so much, and they're longing for someone to get them out of the dilemma that they're in and their family. So they're more apt to listen to you. They're more apt to be manipulated. In the Midwest, in the mountain states, they call it the suicide belt. Why? Because middle-aged men who are unemployed, gun owners, alcoholic, have the highest rates of suicide. There's 124 people every day in that area committing suicide. And the majority, 70% of those people are white, uneducated men who drink too much and own guns. Why are guns a factor? Because it's been proven a long time ago with suicide. If you have a gun and I don't, we're both want to take our lives. I don't have a gun. So I got to go out and talk to somebody about, where do I get a gun? And if you're my friend, you may ask me, what are you looking for a gun for?
Yeah, why?
But you have a gun. You have a gun. You don't have to go anywhere. You can, in an impulsive moment, take your life. If you didn't have a gun, the next day when you wake up, maybe you'd be feeling differently, thinking differently. Maybe you talked to a friend who made some sense and helped you realize that your perspective is off right now. There was a study many years ago that showed that people who commit suicide the most often are policemen and doctors. Why? Doctors have drugs. In an impulsive moment, you just take the drugs out of your drawer in your desk. And police officers have guns. So it's the easy method. And in those states, gun ownership is very high. Depression is very high. Alcoholism and opiate addiction.
Well, what causes, how do I put this without trying to be political? Why is it in some areas it's like that? And you end up in other areas that are very prosperous and low poverty, but other areas have a higher poverty. Is it some sort of a vicious cycle that we're kind of stuck in?
Well, if you, for instance, we live in Massachusetts. I'm in southern Maine at the moment, but in Massachusetts, the unemployment rate is low. So it's much easier to find employment. Education, there are the kids graduating from high school. Most of the high schools, 90% or more go on to college. So we know that education matters dramatically. So in Massachusetts, we have a very good community college system, which is what I recommended to patients that I told stories about in the book, because you can go to a community college and rather than spend 4 years and $100,000 or $200,000 being educated, you can get a certificate in 12 months. You can be a surgical tech, you can be an x-ray tech, you can be a CT scan reader. There's a lot of these jobs that you can be a hairdresser. I have a hairdresser who makes 6 figures. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But I mean, I had no idea that people pay that much, to have their hair taken care of and so forth. But there are a number of these programs that community colleges in Massachusetts have specialized in, these programs where it could be 10 to 12 months of education, and then you have a job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may exist in certain other states, but I know it doesn't exist in certain southern states, certain Midwestern states. So the opportunities are far less. And again, your point about then you become manipulated, being a follower of hateful groups, that's a critical point. I'm so glad you brought that out, because that's where we see, these people are promised all kinds of things, and then they don't have.
And those promises that end up coming from people who perceive themselves anyway as leaders, and if people end up believing what that leader says, they become more vocal in what they're saying because they're attracting more and more people to them. So,
Yes.
on the subject of leaders, how can leaders, let's say good leaders, create change to kind of put a stop to some of that vicious cycle that tends to happen that we just talked about? How can leaders create an impact and
Soulful leaders lead with integrity and empathy and authenticity. They're authentic, care about their people. They will listen, great listeners, and they don't always agree with what you come to them with. They may say, Alex, that's an interesting idea, but right now we don't have the income to do it. And to be honest, we're 5 years away from what you'd like to do. But it's a creative idea, but we don't have a budget for it. We're just making. So you probably would respect me because I'm telling you the truth. We've got X amount of dollars. You have a great idea that would involve a 5-year investment of about 30 engineers, and I can't do it. I just can't take 30 engineers, and I couldn't pay them, and so forth. So those people are respected because they're telling the truth, and they're not. I often look when I consult in corporations, businesses, and I look at the mission statements and wonder, because they're all wonderful, but how many corporations, how many leaders actually follow them? We know now that empathic environments have increased profits, significantly higher profits than corporations and businesses that have non-empathic environments. Why is that? Because people are happy. Happy people are more creative. Creative people make more profits for companies, but they like to go to work. It has been proven that people will go to work for a soulful leader, even if they're making 10% less than the person down the street who's working for a guy who drives them crazy because he's deceptive and makes promises and doesn't keep them, and so forth and so on. Because health matters, well-being matters. And people like to be doing things where they know their creativity is being appreciated.
So how can we go about getting leaders to change? And with some of the points you have in the book, I know there were a couple of examples about bad bosses, shall we say? How does a bad boss go about changing? I'm not a believer. If you've got a bad boss, firing them makes the problem go away. Well, no, it just makes the person go away. The problems are still there. So how do we go about making that change?
One thing, Alex, that hooks in leaders who are not good, you tell them you can make more money. Whenever I'm talking, I say, you know what? Do you want to make more money? Okay, I'm going to tell you how to make more money. This is how you make more money. This is how your people will be happier. And this is how you put more money. More money, that's the key. But then you have to teach them that that's not enough, because they'll say, well, tell me the 10 things to do then, the 10 things to say to my people. And I say, well, it isn't like that. It's not like out of a 1, 2, 3 out of a book. You have to be authentic. You have to be honest. Don't lie to them. Don't lie to them.
Yeah.
There was a CEO several years ago in Massachusetts who was on MSNBC, the finance show. He was asked if they were going to make their goal. And he said, absolutely. Anyway, they didn't even come near making their goal for that quarter. And he lost some friends, and the people who were listening to him, who in his own company, were going, oh, why did he say that? And, in later years, because I consulted that company, he said, I never learned to say I don't know. I always was coming out with this optimism, this cheerleading way of thinking. And if I had just said, you know what, I don't know. I remember when Warren Buffett said one year, he said, don't buy my stock. He said, I don't know. That was the .com thing. And he said, I don't understand the .com. I don't understand it. I know they're making a lot of money, more than we're making right now. He said, but it doesn't make sense to me. I wouldn't. And people invested in him more. Why? Because he was telling the truth. because it was at a time where he was being very conservative. And what happened that year? The market crashed because of .com,
Yeah.
the technology company.
With individuals having, actually, let me take a step back. Does that work, being authentic, help with people's well-being in, either as an individual or part of a company or a community, working on their well-being? Is that kind of one of the cores to seeing success ever go in other directions?
Yes, yes. Because if people are feeling healthy, people are happy, people feel respected, and some corporate leaders, some business leaders don't understand this, political leaders as well. They don't understand that money isn't everything. We all need money. We all want to make money. We all want to live comfortably. Okay. But if you disrespect people, they will undermine you. They will even undermine you unconsciously. You know that report that you absolutely need because you're getting on a flight Monday morning and you ask me you're going to finish it on the weekend, and you talk to me in degrading ways in front of other people in staff meeting, and then somehow I didn't finish the report and you're getting on the plane. And I can even be mad at myself. People get mad at themselves, but they didn't finish it because they don't want you to succeed. Yeah. Even though my bonus depends on it. Because human beings don't like to be dehumanized. Mm-hmm. They just don't.
And
the other aspect that's important is you change people's brains when you treat them respectfully with empathy. And a lot of people think empathy is a soft skill. It isn't. It's about discerning the truth and then giving it to people. The amazing thing is that when you give and receive empathy, you produce oxytocin, the connecting hormone. It makes people feel trust. It makes them feel generous and secure. So if I'm a salesman and I want to sell to you and I'm having an empathic interchange with you, I'm actually creating trust in you for me. You think of people, so many salesmen in the business world will say it's all about relationships. And of course it is, because you keep buying from me because over time you believe in me. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not going to sell you something that I know is going to fail.
Does that contribute to also what you said earlier in the show, that if people aren't being authentic with you, whether it be a leader or a business partner, that also contributes to a person's, I don't want to say willingness, but their habit of listening to wrong sources, and it pushes them, kind of pushing them away into the hands of those that spread wrong information. You're contributing to that factor.
Yes.
Is that
correct?
Yeah,
excellent point. For instance, you're my boss, you disrespect me, you dehumanize me, you do it in front of other people. And now I'm home at night and I'm just so frustrated, and maybe I have a few drinks and I turn on Station X. And Station X is angry. The newscaster is angry and he's talking about this and that. Yeah, now I'm angry too, because of the way you treat me at work. Now he's angry and he's blaming these authorities, these groups. And yes, my mind is most likely going to join in with it because I'm already in that state. Unless you had a balanced sense of self and you could work through this and you'd say, this guy, Alex, treats me horribly. Yeah, I'm making a lot of money, but you know what? I don't want to do this for the rest. I don't want to work for somebody. I'm going to start looking, start going to LinkedIn and get my resume out. And, now you're being proactive. You're saying, I'm not going to just tolerate. Well, what if I get hooked into newscaster X every night? And he's telling me the people that are doing this, in addition to my boss, the government, the institutions, whatever it is. There is a vulnerable person.
Yeah. And
ready to be manipulated.
Yeah. And I'm sure the leader, the manager, the vice president, whoever, doesn't even know they're doing that. Because it's potential that that's happening to them too.
Yes.
And they're, from the C-level, let's say, and the vice president is behaving that way, and that it trickles all on down.
As long as the company is making money, companies tend to tolerate inappropriate behavior.
Mm.
Once they start to fail, then it becomes different. But you get a sense just walking into a building, how people are going to be treated. I remember walking into I was consulting to a small business, and I walked in, and the receptionist looked up at me and she said, "Yep." And she said, "Yep." And the feeling I got immediately was this wasn't going to be good.
Yeah.
I'm walking down the hall, 3 different men in 3-piece suits pass me. Nobody looks at me. Nobody says good morning. It's the first thing in the morning. And I already know how it's going to be when I sit down and meet with the CEO. He was the same. He set the standard for the whole group.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't inviting. I mean, I was just amazed. Who looks up? I mean, she was on her phone and she looks up, "Yup." I mean, I wouldn't have a yup person working. But the men who passed me and the person who owned the company, they were the same. They were cold, kind of harsh. And all he was interested in is how you're going to get me to increase my profits.
Yeah. Only a single idea mind. That's it.
Yeah.
Money, money, money.
Yeah.
Well, we only have 1 minute left. Do you have any final thoughts, for 30 seconds?
Just say, expand your empathy to your listeners. Expand your empathic range. Empathy is the most important capacity for a successful personal and professional life. And in America ReUnited, I have loads of examples of how to deal with people that are difficult, but also how to use empathy to be successful personally and professionally.
There, as I said earlier, there are some really incredible examples in here, and some are, I'll say it again, heartbreaking when you read them. But it's really good. We've come to the end of our show. Dr. Ciaramicoli, thank you so much for joining us again, sharing your expertise and time. I really enjoyed it. I think we probably could be talking for another hour on different things here, because I just kind of was sitting here listening, and I was thinking of all the things that have happened in my work career as well. So thank you very much. And congratulations on the book, by the way.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. You asked great questions and you contributed some certain insights that were very important.
Good. I'm glad. Like I said, was a really interesting book. So thank you once again. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. And to everybody listening and watching, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.